The Montana wilderness stretched below like a vast emerald tapestry, mountain peaks cutting jagged lines against the clear blue sky. Samantha Mitchell gripped the yoke of the Cessna 310, feeling the vibration of twin engines through her fingertips, as she completed her first solo cross-country flight. At 23, she was finally living her dream until both engines sputtered, coughed, and died in the same horrifying moment, leaving nothing but the sound of wind rushing past the suddenly powerless aircraft. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence was deafening. For a split second that stretched into eternity, Samantha froze, her brain struggling to process what was happening. 15,000 feet above the most remote wilderness in Montana, both engines had failed simultaneously. No warning lights, no alarms, just sudden complete silence where the reassuring drone of engines should have been. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cessna N731SP. I've lost both engines over the Bitterroot Range. She spoke into her headset, her voice steadier than she felt. Her flight instructor's words echoed in her mind. In an emergency, remember your training. Fly the plane. First, communicate second, navigate third. Missoula Regional responded immediately, but their voice faded in and out through static. Copy your mayday. Position. Options for emergency landing. Samantha scanned the cockpit instruments, her eyes darting between the altimeter and the airspeed indicator. The plane was already losing altitude, the needle dropping steadily. 15,000 feet gave her maybe 15 minutes of gliding time in the Cessna 310 if she maintained perfect glide speed. 15 minutes to find somewhere, anywhere, to put the aircraft down in a wilderness of jagged peaks, dense forest, and narrow valleys. Through the windshield, the beautiful landscape she'd been admiring moments before now looked hostile and unforgiving. No highways, no fields, no airports within gliding distance. Just mountains, trees, and the occasional glint of water from alpine lakes far too small for a safe landing. Her flight instructor's voice again. Remember, in a dual-engine failure, your aircraft becomes a glider. Maintain best glide speed. Look for the biggest, flattest area you can find. Roads, fields, even water if you have to. Samantha took a deep breath and focused. Best glide speed for the Cessna 310 was 105 knots. She trimmed the aircraft to maintain that speed, fighting the instinct to pull back on the yoke to stay in the air longer. That would only cause a stall, turning a dire situation into a fatal one. This is Cessna N731SP, she radioed again. I'm at 15,000 feet, descending. I have approximately 15 minutes of glide time. I need emergency landing options. The response came back clearer this time. N731SP. This is Missoula approach. We're tracking you. Nearest emergency landing option is Johnson Creek, bearing 045, distance 23 miles. It's a backcountry strip, but it's your best option. Samantha's heart sank. 23 miles was beyond her glide range. The math was simple and merciless. She wouldn't make it. Negative, Missoula. I don't have the glide distance for Johnson Creek. I need closer options. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. There were no closer options. Below her, the mountains seemed to reach up, their pine-covered slopes waiting to embrace the crippled aircraft. Samantha felt sweat beading on her forehead, despite the cool air flowing through the vents. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it down. Fear wouldn't save her. Only clear thinking and decisive action had any chance of that. She pulled out her sectional chart, scanning it desperately for any feature she might have missed. A road, a meadow, anything. Her eyes caught a thin blue line, a river cutting through a valley about 7 miles ahead. Rivers often had sandbars, gravel beds, something that might be flat enough. "Missoula, I'm going to attempt landing along the North Fork," she radioed, making her decision. "I can see what might be a gravel bar from my position." The controller's voice betrayed tension. "Despite professional training." "Copy that, N731SP. Emergency services have been notified. We'll relay your position to search and rescue." The words search and rescue made this terrifyingly real. People were mobilizing on the ground, preparing for the aftermath of what she was about to attempt. Samantha swallowed hard, trying to push away the image of wreckage being combed through by rescuers. The altimeter continued its relentless descent. 12,000 feet. 11,000 feet. Through the side window, Samantha could see her shadow racing across the treetops, growing larger as she lost altitude. She had maybe 10 minutes left. She tried the engine restart procedures, methodically working through the checklist drilled into her during training. Fuel selector valve, check. Magnetos, check. Master switch, recycle. Nothing. The propellers remained motionless, useless. Metal pinwheels against the blue sky. Reaching into the back seat, she grabbed her emergency bag, water, first aid kit, emergency locator beacon, space blanket. She secured it to her body, tightening the straps of her seatbelt afterward. If she survived the landing, she'd need those supplies. The river was getting closer, a silver ribbon winding through the green. She could see it now. There was indeed a gravel bar, a pale crescent against the blue water. It looked small, impossibly small from this height, but it was her only chance. It would have to be perfect, no room for error, no second attempts. "Missoula, I've identified a landing area. Gravel bar on the North Fork, approximately 5 miles ahead of my current position. I'm at 9,000 feet now, still maintaining best glide speed." "Copy that, N731SP. Good luck, Samantha." It was the first time the controller had used her name, a small human connection in this mechanical crisis. Somehow it helped. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Samantha mentally rehearsed what was coming. She'd need to line up with the gravel bar, which ran roughly north to south. She'd need to lose altitude at the right rate, using flaps strategically. Too high, and she'd overshoot. Into forest. Too low, and she'd hit the trees before reaching the bar. The landing gear would be useless on gravel. She'd keep it retracted to avoid flipping. She'd need to touch down at the slowest possible speed without stalling. Altitude: 7,000 feet. Time remaining, about 7 minutes. The mountains were closer now, their features distinct. Pine trees became individual entities rather than a green blanket. She could see the texture of rock faces, the white foam of rapids in the river. The gravel bar was coming into focus. Maybe 600 feet long, if she was lucky, and 100 feet at its widest. A Cessna 310 needed at least 1,500 feet of runway under ideal conditions. This was going to be a controlled crash at best. Samantha's mouth was dry, her palms sweating on the controls. She'd never been religious but found herself making bargains with whatever higher power might be listening. "Just let me survive this. I'll never complain about anything again." Her training kicked in, drowning out the fear. She began talking herself through the procedure, her voice steady in the silent. "Cockpit. Maintain glide speed at 105 knots. Line up with the landing area. When committed to landing, full flaps. Aim for the beginning of the gravel bar. Cut power before touchdown." She gave a bitter laugh at that last instruction from her memory. Power was already cut, quite decisively. Altitude: 5,000 feet. Time remaining, 5 minutes. The valley was opening up below her now. She could see the full length of the gravel bar, and her heart sank further. It was smaller than she'd hoped, maybe 500 feet, not 600, and it wasn't perfectly flat. There. were scattered boulders, driftwood deposited by spring floods. But it was still better than trees or water. Missoula, I'm continuing approach to the gravel bar, currently at 5,000 feet. I can see it clearly now. It's going to be tight. Copy, N731SP. All emergency services have been notified. Helicopter is being dispatched to your coordinates. Another grim reminder that what she was attempting was considered unlikely to succeed. They were already planning the rescue or recovery. No, she couldn't think like that. She was going to land this aircraft, walk away, and have a story to tell. Nothing more. Altitude, 3,000 feet. Time remaining, 3 minutes. Samantha began. Her approach pattern, lining up with the gravel bar, which now seemed to be directly below her. She was still too high. She needed to lose altitude without gaining speed. She deployed the flaps to the first notch, feeling the aircraft shudder as the airflow changed. The gravel bar was growing larger in her windshield, individual rocks, becoming visible. From this height, she could see that the best approach would be from the north, landing southbound. There was a gentle slope that way, and fewer large obstacles. Final approach check, she muttered to herself. Flap set. Landing gear. She paused. Normally, she'd lower the landing gear, but on a gravel bar, the wheels would likely catch and flip the aircraft. Landing gear remains up for belly. Landing. Altitude, 1,500 feet. Time remaining, less than 2 minutes. The trees were rushing past below her now, close enough that she could see individual branches. The river filled her side windows, blue water churning over rocks. The gravel bar was directly ahead, growing in her windshield with alarming speed. Samantha deployed full flaps, feeling the aircraft slow and nose dip. She pulled back slightly, keeping the nose just above the horizon. Too high and she'd stall. Too low and she'd dive into the ground. It was a delicate balance, one she'd practiced hundreds of times in training, but never with the actual stakes of life and death. Missoula, I'm on final approach. Approximately 1 minute to touchdown. Copy that, N731SP. We're tracking you. Emergency services are en route to your position. The gravel bar filled her windshield now. She could see every rock, every piece of driftwood. It still looked impossibly small, but it was her only option. Samantha took one last deep breath, focused every fiber of her being on the controls, and prepared for impact. 500 feet above the ground, she realized with startling clarity that she felt more alive than she ever had before. Time seemed to slow. Colors became more vivid. The blue of the sky, the green of the trees, the gray of the gravel, all seemed to pulse with an intensity she'd never noticed. 300 feet. She could see ripples on the water now, a fish jumping near the shore. A bird took flight from a nearby tree, startled by the approaching aircraft. 200 feet. The aircraft was buffeted by turbulence from the valley's thermal currents. She corrected automatically, her body responding before her mind could. Process the inputs. 100 feet. The gravel bar rushed toward her. She pulled back slightly on the yoke, aiming to touch down as gently as possible on the aircraft's belly. 50 feet. She could see individual pebbles now, the texture of the sand between them. A fallen log at the far end of the bar that she hadn't noticed from higher up. She'd need to stop before reaching it. 20 feet. The shadow of the aircraft raced ahead of her on the gravel, growing larger as she descended. 10 feet. She pulled back a little more, trying to bleed off the last of her airspeed. Impact. The sound was deafening, a horrible screeching of metal on stone that shook the entire airframe. The aircraft bounced once, twice, the fuselage scraping along the gravel, throwing up a spray of stones and sand. The windshield cracked but held. The control panel lights flickered and died. Samantha was thrown against her harness, the breath knocked from her lungs. The aircraft slewed sideways, spinning almost 180 degrees before coming to rest, facing back the way it had come. Silence again, but different this time. Not the eerie silence of engines failing, but the aftermath silence of held breath and pounding hearts. She was alive. Pain registered, her shoulder where the harness had dug in, her neck from the whiplash of impact. But she could move. Nothing seemed broken. The smell of fuel jolted her back to immediate danger. If the tanks had ruptured, fire was imminent. She needed to get out now. Her hands moved automatically to the harness release, fumbling with the buckle. It gave way, and she reached for the door handle, pushing with all her strength. The door was jammed, warped by the impact. She kicked at it, once, twice, 3 times, until it finally swung open with a groan of protesting metal. Samantha tumbled out onto the gravel, the emergency bag still strapped to her body, and crawled away from the aircraft as quickly as she could. When she reached what she hoped was a safe distance, she collapsed onto her back, staring up at the blue sky that had nearly claimed her. The aircraft hadn't exploded. Small mercies. She lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to the sound of the river, the wind in the pines, and her own ragged breathing. She was alive. She had landed a powerless twin-engine aircraft on a gravel bar barely longer than a basketball court. She had survived. Eventually, she sat up, taking stock of her situation. The Cessna was a wreck, the belly torn open, the tail section twisted at an unnatural angle, one wing partially separated from the fuselage. It would never fly again. But it had done its job. It had delivered her to the ground in one piece. Her training once again took over. She needed to establish communication, signal for help, prepare for survival until rescue arrived. She unzipped the emergency bag and pulled out the handheld radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Samantha Mitchell, pilot of Cessna N731SP. I have crash-landed on a gravel bar on the North Fork. I am alive with minor injuries. Aircraft is severely damaged." Static answered her, then a faint voice broken by interference. "Mitchell. Position confirmed. Helicopter. Hour. An hour. She could survive an hour." She'd already survived what should have been unsurvivable. Samantha activated the emergency locator beacon, placing it on a flat rock where it would have clear signal to the sky. Then she took inventory of her supplies: water, energy bars, first aid kit, space blanket, signal mirror, waterproof matches. She treated the cuts on her hands, the bruise forming on her shoulder, the small gash on her forehead she hadn't even noticed in the adrenaline of the moment. None were serious, but they served as physical reminders of what she'd just endured. With immediate survival tasks complete, the emotional weight of what had happened finally hit her. Samantha sat on a sun-warmed rock, watching the river flow past, and began to shake uncontrollably. Tears came, hot and fast, streaming down her face as the fear she'd suppressed during the crisis finally found release. She'd been so close to death, so close to becoming another statistic, another accident report, another cautionary tale told to student pilots. Instead, she was here, breathing, feeling the sun on her face and the solid earth beneath her. It was a miracle, a testament to training, skill, and perhaps a bit of luck. When the shaking subsided, a strange calm settled over her. The world seemed sharper somehow, more vibrant and precious. The blue of the sky was more intense, the green of the pines richer, the sound of the river more musical. She had been given a second chance, a new perspective, a deeper appreciation for the fragility and beauty of life. In the distance, she heard it, the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades cutting through air. Rescue was coming. She stood, pulling the signal mirror from her pack, and began flashing it toward the sound. The helicopter appeared over a ridge, sunlight glinting off its windshield. Samantha waved her arms above her head, the universal signal of a human in need of assistance. The aircraft banked, clearly having spotted her, and began descending toward a flat area at the end of the gravel bar. As the helicopter touched down, its rotor wash creating a miniature sandstorm around her, Samantha felt a surge of gratitude so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. She was going home. She would see her family again, hug her friends, continue her life, a life forever changed by these hours above and on the Montana wilderness. The flight paramedic approached, concern evident even through his professional demeanor. "Samantha Mitchell, are you injured?" She nodded, then shook her head, not quite sure how to answer. Physically, her injuries were minor, but something fundamental had shifted inside her, something that couldn't be seen or treated. "I'm okay," she said finally. "I landed a plane. Without engines on a gravel bar. I shouldn't be alive, but I am." The paramedic smiled, understanding in his eyes. He'd seen this before, survivors who had stared death in the face and emerged transformed. "Let's get you checked out anyway," he said gently, leading her toward the helicopter. That was some landing. Pilots at the base are already talking about it. As they approached the helicopter, Samantha turned for one last look at the wrecked Cessna, a broken bird that had carried her safely to Earth against all odds. In that moment, she made a silent promise to herself. This would not be the end of her flying career. It would be the beginning of something new, a second chance to chase her dreams with a deeper understanding of what really mattered. The helicopter lifted off, rising above the trees, giving her a bird's-eye view of her impromptu landing strip. From above, it looked even smaller, even more impossible. Yet she had done it. She had faced the ultimate test of a pilot and survived. As they flew back toward civilization, Samantha knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever frighten her the same way again. She had looked death in the eye and refused to blink. Whatever challenges life threw at her now, she would face them with the same calm determination that had guided her through those terrifying minutes between engine failure and touchdown. The mountains that had nearly claimed her life now spread out below her, beautiful rather than threatening, a reminder of her triumph rather than her near tragedy. Samantha Mitchell, the pilot who landed a dead plane on an impossible runway, was going home, forever changed, but very much alive. The medical helicopter swept over the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Range, carrying Samantha Mitchell back toward civilization. From her stretcher, secured against the aircraft's vibrations, she watched the wilderness passing below, the same wilderness that had nearly claimed her life just hours before. The contrast wasn't lost on her. Another aircraft. Another journey over the same mountains, but this time she was a passenger, not a pilot fighting for survival. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Your vitals look good," the flight paramedic shouted over the roar of the rotors, checking the monitors attached to her. "But we'll still need to get you properly examined at the hospital. Crash landings can cause injuries that don't show symptoms immediately." Samantha nodded, wincing slightly at the pain in her neck. The adrenaline was wearing off now, replaced by a dull ache that seemed to permeate her entire body. Every muscle protested, reminding her of the violent forces she'd endured during the landing. No, not landing, she corrected herself, the controlled crash. "How long until we reach Missoula?" she asked, her voice sounding strange and distant in her own ears. "About 15 minutes, the paramedic replied. "Your family has been notified. They'll meet us at the hospital." Family, the word triggered something deep within her. During those terrifying minutes after the engines failed, thoughts of her parents, her younger sister, her friends, all the connections that anchored her to this world, had been pushed aside by the immediate demands of survival. Now they came rushing back, along with the sobering realization of what they would have lost if she hadn't succeeded. The helicopter banked, following the contours of a mountain ridge, And through the side window, Samantha caught a glimpse of civilization, the outskirts of Missoula appearing like a mirage after the unforgiving wilderness. Roads, buildings, cars, all the elements of normal life that had seemed so impossibly distant when she was fighting to guide a powerless aircraft to safety. "We're getting reports from the ground team that reached your aircraft," the paramedic said, checking his tablet. "They're saying it's a miracle you walked away from that." The gravel bar was barely 500 feet long, with boulders at both ends. Veteran. Pilots are calling it one of the most impressive emergency landings they've ever seen. Samantha absorbed this information silently. She didn't feel like she'd done anything miraculous. She'd simply followed her training, made decisions based on the limited options available, and gotten incredibly lucky. If the weather had been worse, if the gravel bar hadn't been there, if she'd misjudged her approach by even a small margin, any of those factors could have resulted in a very different outcome. "I just did what I had to do," she finally said. "There wasn't really a choice." The paramedic smiled. "That's what they all say, the ones who make it through impossible situations. But trust me, what you did was extraordinary." The helicopter began its descent toward Missoula General Hospital, the distinctive helipad on the roof growing larger through the windshield. Samantha felt a strange disconnection, as if she were watching all this happen to someone else. This morning, she had been a student pilot excited about her first solo cross-country flight. Now she was a crash survivor being hailed for an extraordinary feat. The transformation felt too sudden, too dramatic to fully comprehend. As the helicopter touched down, its skids meeting the concrete helipad with a gentle bump that nevertheless sent pain shooting through her bruised body, Samantha was struck by a profound realization. Life could change completely in an instant. One moment of mechanical failure had altered everything: her perspective, her understanding of herself, perhaps even the course of her future. The side door slid open, and a team of medical personnel rushed forward, helping transfer her stretcher from the helicopter to a waiting gurney. Above, the rotors were still spinning, the noise and wind making communication difficult. But through the chaos, she caught a glimpse of familiar faces, her parents, pushing past hospital security, their expressions a mixture of terror and relief. "Mom, Dad!" she called out, raising a hand as the gurney was wheeled toward an elevator. They rushed to her side, her mother's face streaked with tears, her father uncharacteristically pale and shaken. They each took one of her hands, holding on as if afraid she might slip away from them again. "Samantha, oh my God," her mother sobbed, words seemingly failing her. "I'm okay," Samantha assured them, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Really? Just banged up a bit." Her father, a commercial airline pilot who had inspired her own aviation dreams, looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, pride mingled with something deeper, more complicated. "They told us what you did," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A dual-engine failure over the mountains. And you put it down on a gravel bar." The elevator doors closed, shutting out the helicopter noise, creating a sudden bubble of relative quiet. In that moment, Samantha saw her father not just as her dad, but as a fellow pilot, one who understood exactly what she had faced and overcome. "I didn't have a lot of options," she said simply. He shook his head, squeezing her hand. "You had one option: to do everything perfectly. And you did." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, x-rays, CT scans, and repetitive questions from different doctors. Physically, she had been incredibly fortunate. A mild concussion, whiplash, bruised ribs, and numerous contusions, but nothing broken, nothing life-threatening. The doctors wanted to keep her overnight for observation, primarily due to the concussion, but assured her she would likely be discharged the following day. By evening, the story of her crash landing had spread. Local news crews gathered outside the hospital, seeking interviews. The Federal Aviation Administration and National Transportation Safety Board had representatives en route to investigate the incident. Her phone, retrieved from the crash site by the recovery team, was flooded with messages from friends, fellow student pilots, and even strangers who had heard about what she'd done. Samantha found the attention disorienting. In her mind, she hadn't done anything heroic, she'd simply survived. The real story, the one that kept replaying in her thoughts, wasn't about the successful landing, but about those moments of absolute terror when both engines failed, when death had seemed not just possible but probable. As twilight settled over Missoula, casting long shadows across her hospital room, Samantha found herself alone for the first time since the crash. Her parents had gone to find food and check into a nearby hotel. The constant stream of medical personnel had finally slowed. In the quiet, with only the soft beeping of monitors for company, she finally had space to process what had happened. She closed her eyes, and immediately the sensations came rushing back. The sudden silence after the engines died, the sickening drop in her stomach as the aircraft began to lose altitude, the desperate scan of the terrain below for any possible landing site, the bone-jarring impact as the Cessna's belly scraped across the gravel. Her heart rate spiked, setting off an alarm on one of the monitors. A nurse hurried in, concern evident on her face. "Everything okay in here?" Samantha took a deep breath, forcing herself to return to the present. "Yes, sorry, just remembering." The nurse nodded with understanding, checking the monitors and adjusting something on the fore-drip. "That's normal. What you went through was traumatic. The body remembers even when we try to forget. Will it always be like this?" Samantha asked, suddenly worried about a future where the crash played on endless loop in her mind. "It gets better," the nurse assured her. "Time helps. So does talking about it." She paused, considering Samantha with a thoughtful expression. "You know, my husband's a pilot. Small planes like you. He always says there are two kinds of pilots, those who've had emergencies and those who will." Samantha managed a small smile. "I guess I'm in the first category now." "The important category is those who survive their emergencies," the nurse replied. "That's the club you want to be in. And you're a member now." After the nurse left, Samantha found herself staring out the window at the darkening sky, thinking about what she'd said. The Club of Survivors. It had an exclusive ring to it, though it wasn't a membership she'd ever sought. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Looking up, she was surprised to see not another medical professional, but a man in his 60s, wearing a flight jacket with numerous patches indicating decades in aviation. "Ms. Mitchell?" he asked, remaining respectfully at the threshold. "I'm Jack Hernandez, Chief Flight Instructor at Mountain Air. I hope I'm not intruding." Mountain Air was the flight school where Samantha had been training. Jack was something of a legend there, a former military pilot with over 30,000 hours of flight time, though he primarily taught advanced courses, and she had never worked with him directly. "No, please, come in," she said, genuinely glad for the distraction from her thoughts. He entered, taking a seat in the visitor's chair beside her bed. Up close, his weathered face showed the lines of someone who had spent a lifetime in cockpits, squinting against the sun at high altitudes. "I've been flying for 43 years, he began without preamble, "and I've heard about a lot of emergency landings. But what you pulled off today," he shook his head, genuine admiration in his eyes, "that was something special." "I just followed the emergency procedures," Samantha said, uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Jack said firmly, "not anyone. I've trained hundreds of pilots, and I can tell you that knowledge of procedures is only part of it. What makes the difference in a situation like yours is keeping your head when everything is falling apart around you. Not everyone can do that." He leaned forward, his expression intense. The recovery team sent photos of the site. That gravel bar was barely long enough for a helicopter, let alone a Cessna 310. You threaded a needle at 100 miles an hour with no power. That takes more than training. It takes instinct, judgment, and extraordinary focus under pressure. Samantha felt a flush of embarrassment, but also a small flicker of pride. Coming from someone like Jack Hernandez, this wasn't empty flattery. "Thank you," she said simply, not knowing what else to say. "I didn't come here just to tell you that, though," Jack continued. "I came to ask about your plans." "My plans?" "For flying. After something like this, some pilots never get back in a cockpit. Others can't stay away. I'm wondering which category you fall into." The question caught Samantha off guard. In the chaos of survival and aftermath, she hadn't thought that far ahead. Would she fly again? Could she? The very idea of being at the controls of an aircraft now triggered a visceral memory of those terrifying moments of powerlessness. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't really had time to think about it." Jack nodded, unsurprised. "That's fair. It's too soon. But I want you to know something. Whatever you decide, you've already proven you have what it takes. Not just to be a pilot, but to be an exceptional one." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, placing it on her bedside table. "When you're ready, if you're ready, I'd like to offer you a place in our advanced emergency procedures course. No charge. What you experience today, most pilots only ever face in simulations. Your perspective would be invaluable." The offer was unexpected and genuinely moving. It represented a path forward, a way to transform her traumatic experience into something positive, not just for herself, but potentially for other pilots. "I'll think about it," she promised. Jack stood, preparing to leave. At the door, he paused, turning back to her with one last thought. "You know, in aviation, we have a saying, a good landing is one you can walk away from. A great landing is one where they can use the plane again." His eyes crinkled with gentle humor. "Yours was definitely in the first category. Next time, let's aim for the second." Despite everything, Samantha found herself laughing, a release of tension that felt both unexpected and necessary. After Jack left, more visitors arrived. Her sister Emma, her roommate Jess, fellow student pilots from her training program. Each brought their own mixture of concern, relief, and curiosity about what had happened. Samantha found herself telling the story again and again, each retelling making it feel a little less immediate, a little more like something that had happened to her rather than something that was still happening. By the time visiting hours ended and her parents returned to say goodnight before heading to their hotel, exhaustion had overtaken her. The doctors had warned her about this, the physical and emotional toll of trauma combined with the natural crash that follows an adrenaline surge. She barely remembered saying goodbye to her parents, drifting into sleep almost as soon as they left, but sleep brought no peace. In her dreams, she was back in the cockpit, the engines dying, the ground rushing up to meet her. Only in these nightmares, there was no gravel bar, no miracle landing, just the jagged peaks of mountains reaching up to claim her. She woke with a start at 3 a.m., heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. A night nurse came to check on her, offering medication to help her sleep, but Samantha declined. Instead, she asked for her personal items, retrieved from the crash by the recovery team. Among them was her pilot's logbook, miraculously undamaged. In the dim light of her hospital room, she opened it, tracing her finger down the neat entries. That documented her journey from first lesson to first solo, each hour building toward the pilot she was becoming. The last entry, made just yesterday, read, "Cross-country solo, Missoula to Kalispell to Great Falls and return. First solo navigation. Exercise." It was incomplete. She hadn't made it back to Missoula, not as planned anyway. How would she record this flight? How could she possibly capture in the sterile columns of a logbook what had happened over the Bitterroot Range? Taking a pen from the bedside table, she made a decision. In the remarks column, she wrote simply, "Dual engine failure over mountains. Emergency landing on gravel bar. Aircraft lost. Pilot survived." The words seemed inadequate, clinical even, but they were true. And perhaps that was enough for now, the truth that despite everything, she had survived. Morning brought more examinations, more questions, and finally, release papers. The doctors were satisfied that her injuries were minor and healing well. They provided prescriptions for pain management and muscle relaxants, scheduled a follow-up appointment, and recommended a therapist experienced in trauma recovery. As she changed from the hospital gown into clothes her mother had brought, Samantha caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. Physically, she looked almost the same as she had yesterday morning, a few visible bruises, a small bandage on her forehead, but otherwise unchanged. Yet she felt fundamentally different, as if the person staring back at her was someone new, someone who had passed through fire and emerged transformed. Her father was waiting to drive her home, her mother having gone ahead to prepare the house for her arrival. The hospital corridor seemed unnecessarily long, and Samantha was grateful for the wheelchair policy that spared her the need to walk the entire distance to the exit. News crews were still camped outside, but hospital security had arranged for them to leave through a side entrance, avoiding the media gauntlet. In the car, her father was uncharacteristically quiet, focusing intently on the road as they navigated through Missoula's morning traffic. It wasn't until they were on the highway, heading toward the family home in Helena, that he finally spoke. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "All those hours I spent encouraging you to fly. Never thinking that it might." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Dad, it wasn't your fault," Samantha said firmly. "Mechanical failures happen. They're rare, but they happen. You taught me that from day one. I know. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it emotionally are very different things." He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "When your mother called, telling me your plane had gone down, I've never felt so helpless in my life." Samantha reached over, placing her hand on his arm. "But I'm here. I made it." "Because you're an extraordinary pilot," he said, pride evident beneath the lingering fear. "Because somehow, despite having less than 50 hours in your logbook, you did everything right when it mattered most." They drove in silence for a while, the mountains that had nearly claimed her life visible in the distance, beautiful and indifferent in the morning light. "Jack Hernandez came to see me last night," Samantha said eventually. "He offered me a place in the Advanced Emergency Procedures course." Her father nodded, unsurprised. "Jack's got a good eye for talent. What did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm ready to think about flying again yet." "That's completely understandable," her father assured her. "There's no rush. No one would blame you if you decided to walk away from aviation entirely after what happened." The statement, though clearly meant to be supportive, struck Samantha with unexpected force. Walk away from flying? Despite the trauma, despite the nightmares, despite the fact that she'd nearly died in an aircraft just yesterday, the idea of never flying again felt like a different kind of loss, one almost as profound as the one she'd narrowly avoided. "I don't think I want to walk away," she said slowly, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "I just need some time." Her father smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the accident. "That's my girl." As they crested a hill, the landscape opened up before them, rolling plains stretching toward distant mountains, the sky vast and blue above. It was the kind of view that had made Samantha fall in love with flying in the first place, the perspective that only altitude could provide, the sense of freedom and possibility. Looking at it now, she felt something stir within her, not fear, as she might have expected, but a quiet determination. What had happened over the Bitterroot Range would always be part of her story, but it wouldn't be the end of that story. There were still chapters to be written, skies to be navigated, horizons to be chased. The road stretched ahead, leading home, a temporary destination on a journey that, Samantha now knew with growing certainty, would eventually lead her back to the cockpit. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but someday. Because while the mountains had nearly taken her life, they had also shown her what she was capable of when faced with the ultimate test. And that was a lesson worth more than all the flight hours in the world. 3 weeks after the crash, Samantha sat in the backyard of her parents' Helena home, nursing a cup of coffee as the morning sun painted the distant mountains gold. Her physical injuries were healing. The bruises had faded to dull yellows and greens, the cuts had closed, and the persistent ache in her neck and shoulders had diminished to an occasional twinge. The psychological wounds, however, remained raw. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sleep still brought nightmares, variations on the same theme of falling from the sky, engine silent, the ground rushing up to meet her. Some nights she managed to land safely on the gravel bar. Other nights she wasn't so fortunate. She would wake gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, the phantom sensation of impact still reverberating through her body. Her father appeared at the back door, a copy of Flying magazine in his hand. "There's something you should see," he said, crossing the yard to join her at the patio table. He opened the magazine to a marked page and slid it across to her. The headline read, "Miracle on the Bitterroot, Student Pilot's Impossible Landing." Beside it was a photo of her wrecked Cessna, its belly torn open like a wounded animal, surrounded by wilderness rescue personnel. "I don't think I want to read about myself," Samantha said, pushing the magazine away. "It's not just about you," her father insisted gently. "Read the last paragraph." Reluctantly, Samantha pulled the magazine back and skimmed through the article, until she reached the conclusion. Mitchell's extraordinary landing has already become a case study at flight schools across the country. What she accomplished goes beyond luck or even basic training, says veteran flight instructor Jack Hernandez. It demonstrates the human capacity for clear thinking and precise execution under the most extreme pressure. Every pilot hopes they would do as well in a similar situation, but the truth is, what she did was exceptional. In an age of increasingly automated aircraft, Mitchell's survival is a powerful reminder that the most sophisticated safety system in any cockpit remains the pilot. Samantha set the magazine down, unsure how to feel about being transformed into a teaching example, a case study in survival against the odds. "The NTSB called yesterday," her father said. "The preliminary report is ready. Do you want to know what they found?" She nodded, both dreading and needing to understand what had gone so catastrophically wrong that day. "Metal fatigue in the fuel distribution system," he explained. "Microscopic cracks that allowed air into the fuel lines. When you hit turbulence at altitude, it created an airlock that starved both engines simultaneously. So it wasn't anything." "I did?" The question had haunted her, despite rational assurances that dual engine failures were vanishingly rare and almost never the pilot's fault. "No, sweetheart. Nothing you could have done differently would have prevented it. In fact, the investigator said the pre-flight inspection wouldn't have caught it. The cracks were internal." Samantha absorbed this information, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Not her fault. The knowledge wouldn't stop the nightmares. "But it helped. There's something else," her father continued. "The flight school's insurance is covering the cost of the aircraft, of course. But because the failure was mechanical, not pilot error, there's a settlement. For you." "A settlement? I don't understand." "Compensation for trauma, loss of training time, medical expenses." He paused. "It's substantial. Enough to pay for the rest of your flight training, if that's what you decide to do. If That small word contained an ocean of uncertainty. 3 weeks after the crash, Samantha still hadn't decided whether she would ever fly again. The desire was there, buried beneath layers of fear and doubt, but she couldn't yet imagine sitting in a cockpit without reliving those terrifying moments over the Bitterroot. "I don't know, Dad," she said honestly. "I just don't know." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "No rush. The money will be there when you decide, whatever you decide." Later that day, as Samantha scrolled through messages on her phone, an email notification appeared from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Thank you for saving my life too." Curious, she opened it to find a message from someone named Marcus Chun. "Dear Ms. Mitchell, you don't know me, but on June 15th, I was scheduled to fly on a Cessna 310 from Missoula to Kalispell, the same aircraft you were piloting when both engines failed. My meeting was postponed at the last minute, so I canceled my charter. The plane went to you for your solo cross-country flight instead. When I heard about what happened, I was stunned. If not for a random scheduling change, it might have been me in that aircraft when the engines failed. But unlike you, I'm not a pilot. I wouldn't have known what to do. I wouldn't have survived. I've been following your story, and I wanted to reach out to say thank you. Your skills saved your life that day, but in a way, it saved mine too. I have a wife and 2 young daughters who still have their father because you were the one flying that plane, not me. Whatever you decide to do next, know that there's at least one person in the world who sees your experience not just as a terrifying ordeal, but as a miracle that gave him a second chance at life. With deepest gratitude, Marcus Chun, Samantha." Read the message twice, tears welling in her eyes. In the weeks since the crash, she had thought of the event only in terms of her own trauma, her own narrow escape from death. She had never considered the cosmic shuffle of schedules and circumstances that had put her in that particular aircraft on that particular day. If not her, it would have been someone else. Perhaps someone like Marcus Chun, who would have had no chance against the impossible odds she had faced. The realization shifted something inside her. Her survival wasn't just about her anymore. It was connected to a web of lives and possibilities, causes and effects that extended far beyond her own experience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, for the first time since the crash, Samantha pulled out her old flight manuals. She didn't open them, just let her fingers trace the familiar covers, feeling the weight of them in her hands. Not a commitment, not yet, but a small acknowledgement that the door remained open. Her phone rang. Dr. Eleanor Matthews, the trauma therapist she had been seeing weekly since her discharge from the hospital. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Dr. Matthews said when Samantha answered, "but I wanted to check in. We had to reschedule your appointment this week, and I was thinking about you." "I'm doing okay," Samantha replied, surprised to find she meant it. "Actually, something interesting happened today. I got an email from someone who was supposed to be on that plane instead of me. He thanked me for saving his life by being the one who was flying when the engines failed." "That's quite profound," Dr. Matthews observed. "How did it make you feel? Like maybe there was a reason it was me up there. Not in some grand cosmic destiny sense, but just, if it had to happen to someone, maybe it's good it happened to someone who could handle it." "That's a powerful reframe of the experience," the therapist said. "It transforms you from victim to, what would you call it?" "The right person in the wrong place," Samantha said, the words coming to her spontaneously. Dr. Matthews laughed. Softly, "I like that. Very apt. Have you thought any more about what we discussed last session? About visiting the flight school?" Samantha glanced at the flight manuals on her desk. "I'm getting there. Not ready to commit to flying again, but I'm thinking about it more concretely now." "Progress, not perfection," Dr. Matthews reminded her. one step at a time. After they hung up, Samantha made a decision. She texted her friend Jess, who had been checking in regularly since the crash. "Want to drive me to the airport tomorrow? Not to fly, just to visit." The response came. Almost immediately. "Absolutely. What time?" The next morning dawned clear and calm, perfect flying weather. As Jess's car approached Mountain Air Flight School, Samantha felt her heart rate increasing, her palms growing damp with sweat. This was the first time she had been near an airport since the crash, and her body was responding with a flood of anxiety. "We can turn around," Jess offered, noticing her friend's distress. "No pressure." "No," Samantha said firmly. "I need to do this." The flight school occupied a modest building adjacent to the general aviation section of Helena Regional Airport. Through the large windows, Samantha could see aircraft on the tarmac, Cessnas, Pipers, a Diamond A-20 used for advanced training. Once, these planes had represented freedom, adventure, the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. Now they triggered a complex mixture of longing and fear. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The familiar smells hit her immediately. Aviation fuel, coffee, the distinctive odor of well-thumbed charts and manuals. Behind the front desk, Maria, the school's administrator, looked up and gasped, "Samantha! Oh my goodness!" She hurried around the desk to embrace her. "We've all been thinking about you so much. How are you doing?" "I'm okay," Samantha said, the standard response she'd developed over the past weeks. "Getting better. Are you?" Maria hesitated, clearly unsure how to ask the question delicately. "Are you back to resume training?" "No, not yet. I just needed to see this place again, to remind myself that it exists." Maria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, Jack's doing a ground school session right now, but he'll be done in about 20 minutes if you want to say hello." "I'd like that." As Maria returned to her desk, the door to the flight planning room opened, and two student pilots emerged, charts in hand, deep in conversation about their upcoming training flight. They fell silent when they noticed Samantha, recognition dawning on their faces. "You're Samantha Mitchell," one of them said, awe evident in his voice. "The one who landed on the gravel bar." Samantha nodded uncomfortably, still not accustomed to being recognized, to being known for the worst day of her life. "That was incredible," the other student said. "We studied your emergency procedures in ground school last week. Jack said your decision-making process should be the model for all of us if we ever face a similar situation." "I just did what I was trained to do," Samantha replied, the response automatic by now. "But that's just it," the first student insisted. "Under that kind of pressure, most people forget their training. They panic. You didn't." Before Samantha could respond, the flight school's chief mechanic, Tom Reyes, emerged from the hangar area. His face lit up when he saw her. "Mitchell, get over here." He enveloped her in a bear hug that momentarily took her breath away. "Damn, it's good to see you." Tom had been the one who had checked the Cessna 310 before her ill-fated flight. The NTSB had cleared him of any negligence, the metal fatigue that caused the fuel system. Failure would have been impossible to detect during a standard pre-flight inspection, but Samantha knew he had still carried a burden of guilt. "How are you, Tom?" she asked as he released her from the hug. "Better now that I see you standing here in one piece," he said gruffly, emotion evident beneath his usual tough exterior. "Listen, I need to show you something. Got a minute?" Curious, Samantha followed him through the building and out a back door that led to the maintenance hangar. Inside, several aircraft were in various states of disassembly, mechanics working methodically on engines, avionics, and control surfaces. Tom led her to a workbench where an engine component was laid out for inspection. "This is what failed on your aircraft," he explained, pointing to a section of metal tubing with hairline cracks visible along its surface. "The manufacturer has issued a service bulletin. Every Cessna 310 in the country is being checked for similar defects. Samantha stared at the innocuous-looking piece of equipment that had nearly cost her life. It seemed impossible that something so small, so seemingly insignificant, could have such catastrophic consequences. Your close call may have saved other lives, Tom continued. Without the investigation into your crash, this defect might have gone undetected until it caused another failure, maybe with a pilot who couldn't do what you did. Another unexpected ripple effect of her survival. First Marcus Chun, now potentially other pilots who would never know how close they came to disaster, because her experience had triggered a safety inspection. I never thought of it that way, she admitted. Well, you should, Tom said firmly. That's how aviation safety works. Every incident, every accident, every close call becomes a lesson that makes flying safer for everyone who comes after. As they walked back to the main building, Samantha's perspective continued to shift. What had happened to her wasn't just a personal trauma to be overcome. It was now part of the collective knowledge that made aviation safer. Her experience had value beyond her own life. They returned to find Jack Hernandez emerging from the classroom, surrounded by students asking last-minute questions about the ground school lesson. When he spotted Samantha, he excused himself and approached with a warm smile. Mitchell, good to see you outside of a hospital bed. Thanks for visiting me there, she said. It meant a lot. Jack nodded, then glanced at his watch. I have about an hour before my next lesson. Want to grab coffee? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. 10 minutes later, they were seated at a small cafe on the airport perimeter, watching aircraft take off and land against the backdrop of Montana's mountains, including the Bitterroot Range, where Samantha had fought for her life. So, Jack said after they'd received their drinks, have you given any thought to my offer? The Advanced Emergency Procedures course? Some, Samantha admitted. But I'm still not sure if I'm ready to fly again. I understand that. But what I'm proposing wouldn't require you to fly immediately. The course begins with 6 weeks of ground school, theory, simulator work, case studies. No actual aircraft. Until you feel ready. And if I never feel ready? Jack considered this, his weathered face thoughtful. Then aviation will have lost a talented pilot, but that would be your choice to make. No one would blame you. He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. But I don't think that's how your story ends, Samantha. I've been teaching pilots for over 30 years. I've seen how they respond to incidents and accidents. The ones like you, the ones who did everything right when it all went wrong, they usually find their way back to the sky. Because they've faced the worst that flying can throw at them, and they survived. What is there left to fear after that? His words resonated with something deep inside her, a truth she had been approaching slowly over the past weeks. The worst had already happened. She had already faced the nightmare scenario that haunts every pilot's darkest thoughts, and she had emerged alive. Let me think about it, she said, not ready to commit, but feeling the pull of possibility more strongly than before. Of course. The class starts in 3 weeks. The spot is yours if you want it. As they watched, a student pilot executed a slightly bouncy landing in a Cessna 172, clearly still mastering the delicate art of bringing an aircraft back to Earth. Samantha found herself mentally coaching through the process, a little less. Back pressure, watch your descent rate, feel the runway. You're still a pilot, you know, Jack said, observing her focus on the landing student. License or no license, flying or not flying. What you learned, what you did up there, that's part of you now. It doesn't go away just because you're on the ground. That evening, as Samantha sat on the front porch, swing at her parents' house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, she thought about Jack's words. You're still a pilot. The identity she had been working toward for years, the dream she had pursued since childhood, it wasn't gone, wasn't lost in the trauma of the crash. It had been tested, certainly, pushed to its absolute limits, but it remained intact. Her father joined her on the swing, handing her a mug of hot chocolate, their traditional evening ritual since she was a child. "Good day?" he asked. "Interesting day," she replied. "I went to the flight school." He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "I saw the component that failed in my plane. They're checking all the other Cessna 310s now because of what happened to me. And Jack offered me a spot in the Advanced Emergency Procedures course again. The ground school portion starts in 3 weeks. And what do you think about that?" her father asked carefully. Samantha took a sip of hot chocolate, considering. I'm not done with flying yet. I don't know exactly what that means or what it looks like going forward, but I'm not ready to close that door." He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I hoped you'd say that. Not because I want to push you back into the cockpit before you're ready, but because I've watched you love aviation your entire life. It would be a tragedy to lose that because of one terrible day. Even a day that almost killed me. Especially that day," he said firmly. "Because that day also showed what you're capable of. Most student pilots faced with a dual-engine failure over mountains would have frozen, panicked, made fatal mistakes. You didn't. You flew that plane until the very last second, making the best possible decisions with the terrible options you had. That's not something to run from, it's something to build on." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Samantha felt a sense of peace settling over her for the first time since the crash. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but it existed. One step at a time, as Dr. Matthews had advised. The next step was Jack's ground school, theory, simulators, a gradual return to the world of aviation without the immediate pressure of actual flight. After that, she couldn't see that far ahead yet, but she could imagine a future where the sky called to her again, not with terror, but with possibility. Where the memories of that day over the Bitterroot became not just a nightmare to be endured, but a foundation of experience to build upon. Where she became not just a pilot who survived against impossible odds, but a pilot because she had survived against impossible odds. 3 weeks later, Samantha walked into the classroom at Mountain Air Flight School, a new notebook in hand, ready for the first session of the Advanced Emergency Procedures course. 5 other pilots were already seated, all experienced, all with hundreds more hours in their logbooks than her. They looked up as she entered, recognition and respect in their eyes. Jack stood at the front of the room, a knowing smile on his face as she chose a seat in the front row. "Welcome, everyone," he began as the clock hit the hour. "This course will challenge you in ways you've never been challenged as pilots. We'll explore scenarios most aviators go their entire careers without facing. We'll push your decision-making skills to their limits. And at the end of it, you'll be better pilots, not because you can perform prettier landings or more efficient climbs, but because you'll know what to do when everything goes wrong." His eyes met Samantha's briefly before continuing. "We have a special participant with us for this course. Most of us learn emergency procedures in simulators or through theoretical exercises. Samantha Mitchell has lived them. Her experience will be invaluable to us all." As the class turned to look at her, Samantha felt not embarrassment, but a quiet pride. Her ordeal had meaning now, purpose. It would help these pilots prepare for situations they hoped never to face, but needed to be ready for. "Now," Jack continued, "let's talk about engine failures. Not the neat, orderly scenarios in your training manuals, but the messy, complicated, terrifying reality of when engines stop working in flight." As he spoke, Samantha opened her notebook and began to write. Not just as a student absorbing new information, but as someone with hard-won wisdom to share. The nightmare over the Bitterroot would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her future. It had become instead the first chapter in a new story, one where fear was acknowledged but not yielded to, where trauma became a teacher rather than a jailer, where the worst day of her life became the foundation for all the better days to come. Outside the classroom windows, aircraft took off and landed in the Montana sunshine, each one a testament to humanity's determination to master the sky despite its dangers. Samantha watched them for a moment, feeling not dread, but a familiar stirring of longing. Soon, she thought. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon enough, she would be among them again, wiser, stronger, and unafraid of the silence that came when engines failed, because she had learned that even in that silence, she could hear her own courage speaking. 6 months after the crash, Samantha stood on the tarmac beside a sleek Cirrus SR-22, running through her pre-flight checklist with meticulous precision. The early autumn morning cast long shadows across Helena Regional Airport as she inspected the control surfaces, checked fuel levels, and examined every visible component of the aircraft. No matter how routine the flight, she never rushed this process anymore, a lesson written into her soul by the Bitterroot crash. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Everything looks good, she told Jack Hernandez, who was observing her pre-flight routine with a practiced eye. Oil levels normal, fuel sufficient, control surfaces responsive. Jack nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. Very thorough. You ready for this? The question carried weight beyond the immediate flight they were preparing for. This wasn't just another training exercise. It was Samantha's first flight over mountainous terrain since the crash. They had worked up to this moment gradually. First simulator sessions, then short flights over flat terrain, gradually expanding her comfort zone until this final frontier remained, facing the mountains again. I think so, she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Weather's perfect, aircraft's in good shape, and I've got the best instructor in Montana sitting right beside me. Jack laughed. Flattery will get you everywhere, Mitchell. But remember, I'm just here as a safety observer. This is your flight. In the months since joining the Advanced Emergency Procedures course, Samantha had progressed from reluctant participant to star student. Her first-hand experience with catastrophic engine failure had given her insights that even veteran pilots found valuable. She had developed a reputation for asking the hardest questions, for pushing scenarios to their limits, for never being satisfied with easy answers when lives could depend on finding better ones. But flying over mountains again, that final psychological hurdle remained. Today's flight would take them on a route similar to the one she had attempted on that fateful day, though in a different aircraft and with an experienced instructor beside her. The goal wasn't just to complete the flight, but to reclaim the sky that had nearly claimed her. Samantha completed her walk-around inspection and climbed into the pilot's seat, settling into the familiar environment of the cockpit. The Cirrus was more advanced than the Cessna 310 she had flown before, with glass panel displays replacing traditional instruments and a whole aircraft parachute system that provided an additional layer of safety in case of emergency. Nice to have options, isn't it? Jack commented, noticing her glance at the parachute handle, a red lever positioned above them, designed to deploy the aircraft's built-in recovery system if all else failed. Very nice, Samantha agreed. Though I'm planning on not needing it. She began the engine start procedure, feeling the comforting vibration as the powerful Continental engine came to life. Each step of the checklist was a small victory, a reaffirmation that she belonged here, that the crash hadn't taken this from her. As they taxied toward the runway, Samantha felt the familiar mixture of excitement and focus that had drawn her to aviation since childhood. The rhythm of radio communications, the precision of control inputs, the symphony of systems working together, These had once been pure joy. After the crash, they had become fraught with anxiety. Now slowly, they were becoming joy again. But a deeper kind, tempered by experience and respect for the razor's edge all pilots navigate. Helena Tower, Cirrus 34 Lima requesting takeoff, runway 27, VFR to Missoula with flight following. Cirrus 34 Lima, Helena Tower. You're cleared for takeoff, runway 27. Wind 270 at 8 knots. Contact departure on 124, 6 when airborne. Cleared for takeoff, runway 27, will contact departure on 124, 6, Cirrus 34 Lima. Samantha advanced the throttle smoothly, feeling the aircraft surge forward as it accelerated down the runway. At rotation speed, she applied gentle back pressure on the yoke, and the Cirrus lifted gracefully into the morning air, leaving the ground behind. The moment of takeoff had once been her favorite part of flying, that magical transition from earthbound to airborne. After the crash, it had become a moment of tension, her body bracing for disaster. Today, she felt something new, not the uncomplicated joy of before, nor the anxiety that had followed trauma, but a profound appreciation for the privilege of flight, for the technology and skill that made it possible, for the gift of second chances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As they climbed to their cruising altitude of 9,500 feet, the landscape opened beneath them, the city of Helena giving way to forests and then the rising contours of the mountains. The Bitterroot Range waited ahead, its peaks no longer ominous. Specters in her nightmares, but simply geological features to be respected and navigated. Beautiful day for flying, Jack observed as they leveled off. How are you feeling? Good, Samantha replied, scanning her instruments and then the horizon. Really good, actually. It wasn't just empty reassurance. She did feel good, alert but not anxious, focused but not fixated. The months of therapy, simulator work, and incremental flights had built a foundation of new confidence. Not the innocent confidence of before, but something more durable, forged through adversity. Mind if I throw you a scenario? Jack asked, his expression casual but his eyes watchful. Samantha knew what was coming. They had discussed it beforehand. At some point during this flight, Jack would simulate an emergency, testing her response over the very terrain that had nearly claimed her life. They both knew it was necessary, a deliberate confrontation with her deepest aviation fear. Go ahead, she said, her voice steady. Jack waited until they were directly over the mountains before making his move. Engines failing, he announced. Calmly, you're losing power. What do you do? Though it was only a simulation, the engine continued to run perfectly. Samantha felt her heart rate spike. For a moment, she was back in that other cockpit, watching both engines die, feeling the sickening lurch as the aircraft began its unpowered descent. But only for a moment. Training and experience took over. First, fly the plane, she said. Maintaining altitude and airspeed. Fuel selector check, magnetos check, engine instrument scan for abnormalities. She methodically worked through the emergency checklist, her voice clear and actions precise. Simultaneously, I'm looking for landing options, calculating glide distance, identifying potential sites. Below them stretched the same wilderness that had offered her only a tiny gravel bar before. But with her new training, she saw it differently now, not just as hostile terrain, but as a landscape of possibilities. He tapped the red handle above them. The CAPS parachute system is an option, but deployment has its own risks over mountainous terrain. I'd save it as a last resort if the meadow approach became untenable. Perfect, Jack said. Emergency. Over. You can return to normal flight. Samantha exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding tension in her shoulders. But it wasn't the paralyzing fear she might have expected. She had faced the scenario, processed it logically, and developed a viable plan, all while flying over the very mountains that had nearly ended her life. "You know," Jack said conversationally as they continued toward Missoula, "the hardest lesson for pilots to learn isn't how to fly the airplane. It's how to make peace with the risks while respecting them enough to stay alive." "That's been the challenge," Samantha admitted. "Finding the balance between paralyzing fear and dangerous overconfidence. And where do you think you are on that spectrum now?" She considered the question seriously, watching the mountains pass beneath their wings. "Somewhere in the middle, I hope. I know exactly how quickly things can go wrong now. That's something you can't unlearn. But I also know that with proper training, good decision-making, and sometimes a bit of luck, most situations have solutions." They flew in comfortable silence for a while, the engine's steady drone a reassuring backdrop. The Bitterroot Range gradually gave way to gentler terrain as they approached Missoula. Ahead, Samantha could see the airport where, 6 months earlier, she had been airlifted after the crash. "Want to know something interesting?" Jack said as they began their descent. "I've been flying for over 40 years, had 2 emergency landings of my own, and instructed pilots through countless real and simulated emergencies. In all that time, I've noticed something. The pilots who face serious incidents early in their careers often become the best pilots in the long run." "Why is that?" Samantha asked, genuinely curious. "Because they develop a kind of dual vision. They can see both the beauty and joy of flight and its inherent dangers simultaneously. They don't take anything for granted. They stay sharp when others get complacent. And they make decisions based on reality, not wishful thinking." As they approached Missoula International, Samantha felt a surge of emotion that caught her by surprise. The last time she had intended to land here, she had been in a powerless aircraft, fighting for her life. Now she was returning on her own terms, closing a circle that had remained painfully open. Missoula Tower, Cirrus 34 Lima 10. Miles east, inbound for landing with information Charlie. Cirrus 34 Lima, Missoula Tower, report 3-mile final. Runway 29. The landing was textbook, smooth approach, gentle touchdown, controlled rollout. As they taxied to the general aviation area, Samantha felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for the technical execution, but for the emotional milestone it represented. They parked the aircraft and completed the shutdown checklist. As the propeller spun to a stop, Jack turned to her with a serious expression. "You know, when you first came to my advanced emergency procedures class, I wasn't sure if you'd ever fly again, much less return to these mountains. I've seen promising careers end after less traumatic incidents than yours. What changed your mind?" Samantha asked. "I watched you in the classroom, how you approached every scenario with a determination to find solutions, how you turned your experience into expertise instead of letting it become a limitation. That's rare, Mitchell. That's the mark of someone who's going to contribute something significant to aviation." After completing their post-flight procedures and filing a new flight plan for the return journey, they took a break at the airport. Kef. Through the windows, Samantha could see aircraft taking off and landing, each one a testament to human ingenuity and courage. As she sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the Aviation Safety Board, confirming her appointment as a speaker at next month's Safety Symposium. The topic, Decision-Making Under Extreme Pressure, Lessons. From a dual-engine failure over mountainous terrain. After her successful completion of Jack's course, opportunities like this had begun to appear, chances to share her experience with other pilots, to transform her trauma into teaching. That might save lives. She had accepted them cautiously at first, but with growing confidence as she discovered her ability to translate personal experience into valuable insights. "Good news?" Jack asked, noticing her expression. "Just confirmation of the safety symposium next month." I'm still not sure what I'm going to say. You'll find the words, he assured her. Just tell your story honestly. What went right? What went wrong? What you learned? That's all anyone can ask. The return flight to Helena was uneventful. Clear skies, smooth air, reliable engines. But Samantha found herself running mental. Emergency scenarios anyway, a habit she had developed since the crash. What if the engine quit now? What landing options would she have? What would the glide ratio be from this altitude? Not from anxiety, but from a deep commitment to preparedness that had become central to her approach to flying. As they flew over, the exact coordinates where her engines had failed 6 months earlier, Jack glanced at her. Thinking about it? Yes, she admitted. But not in the way you might expect. I'm actually feeling grateful. Grateful? For the experience. As terrible as it was, it taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. About flying, yes, but also about myself. What I'm capable of when everything is falling apart. Jack nodded thoughtfully. The ancient Greeks had a concept called pathimathos, wisdom through suffering. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. As Helena came into view, Samantha reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. From trauma patient to trauma survivor to something beyond survival. She had not only returned to flying, but had found a deeper purpose within aviation, using her experience to help others persist scenarios they hoped never to face. After landing and completing their post-flight procedures, Jack handed her the logbook, your entry, your flight. Samantha wrote the details, date, aircraft type, route, duration, and then paused at the remarks column. After a moment's consideration, she wrote, "First mountain flight post-crash, full circle." Jack read it and smiled. "Perfect. So what's next for you, Mitchell?" "I'm thinking about getting my flight instructor certificate," she said, the idea having crystallized during their flight today. "I want to teach, especially emergency procedures. Use what happened to me to help other pilots be better prepared." "You'd be excellent at that," Jack said with genuine enthusiasm. "There's nothing like learning from someone who's been through the real thing." As they walked across the tarmac toward the flight school building, the late afternoon sun cast their shadows long across the concrete. 6 months ago, Samantha had wondered if she would ever feel at home in the sky again. Now she was planning a future that didn't just include flying, but teaching others to fly safely. "You know," Jack said, pausing at the door, "there's a saying among test pilots. Experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. You wanted an uneventful cross-country flight that day. Instead, you got an experience that few pilots survive to learn from. What matters is what you do with that experience now." 1 year to the day after the crash, Samantha stood before a classroom of student pilots at Mountain Air Flight School, now wearing the uniform of a certified flight instructor. On the whiteboard behind her was written, "Emergency procedures, beyond the checklist." "Aviation is unforgiving of carelessness, incapacity, or neglect," she began, quoting the famous aviator Captain A.G. Lamplugh. "But it's also incredibly rewarding for those who approach it with respect, preparation, and clear thinking under pressure." She moved to the front of the desk, making eye contact with each student. "The checklists you've memorized are essential. The procedures you've practiced are crucial. But in a real emergency, there's an element that goes beyond these technical aspects, the human element. How you manage your fear, how you prioritize tasks when everything is happening at once, how you make decisions with incomplete information and limited time." One of the students raised a hand. "Is it true that you survived a dual-engine failure over the Bitterroots?" Samantha nodded. "Yes, though I prefer to think of it as a learning experience rather than just a survival story. And that's what I want to share with you today. Not just what happened, but what it taught me about being a better, safer pilot." As she guided the class through scenarios drawn from her own experience, but applicable to many emergency situations, Samantha felt a deep sense of purpose. The crash had nearly taken everything from her: her life, her passion for flying, her future. Instead, it had given her a unique perspective and an opportunity to influence aviation safety in ways she never could have imagined before. After class, as the students filed out, Jack appeared in the doorway, a newspaper in his hand. "Have you seen this?" he asked, handing her the paper folded to a specific article. The headline read, "FAA implements new fuel system inspection requirements following Montana crash investigation." The article detailed how the investigation into Samantha's accident had led to the discovery of similar metal fatigue issues in multiple aircraft, resulting in new maintenance protocols that had potentially prevented other failures. "Your crash may have saved numerous lives," Jack said quietly. "Pilots who will never know how close they came to facing what you faced." Samantha scanned the article, a complex emotion washing over her. Not pride exactly, but a profound sense that her suffering had served a greater purpose. The ripples from that day continued to spread outward, touching lives she would never know. That evening, she visited the rehabilitation center where she volunteered once a week, working with survivors of various traumas, not just aviation accidents, but car crashes, workplace injuries, and other life-altering events. Her own experience had taught her that physical recovery was only part of the journey. The psychological healing was often more challenging and required guides who had walked the path before. "Today we're going to talk about reclaiming what was taken from you," she told the small group gathered in the center's community room. "Not by going back to who you were before, that person is gone, but by discovering who you can become now, with everything you've learned through your experience." As she shared her own journey, the nightmares, the fear, the gradual rebuilding of confidence, she saw recognition in their eyes. Trauma created a kind of fellowship, a shared understanding, that transcended the specific circumstances of their injuries. "The goal isn't to pretend it never happened," she explained. "The goal is to integrate it into your life story in a way that gives it meaning beyond just suffering." Later, driving home under a vast Montana sky painted with stars, Samantha reflected on how far she had come from that terrifying day over the Bitterroots. The crash would always be part of her story, a pivotal chapter that had changed everything that followed. But it was no longer the defining moment of her life, just one important moment among many others, past and yet to come. She thought of all the flights she had completed since returning to the sky, each one a small victory. She thought of the students she was now teaching, passing on not just technical knowledge, but hard-won wisdom about resilience and clear thinking under pressure. She thought of the safety improvements her crash had triggered, protecting pilots who would never know her name. The next day, she would take another student into the mountains for their first experience with high-altitude flying. The route would pass near the gravel bar where she had crashed, a place she now visited regularly, not to relive the trauma, but to honor the turning point it represented. Life, like aviation, carried inherent risks. The key wasn't to avoid them completely. That would mean never leaving the ground, never experiencing the freedom and perspective that came with flight. The key was to acknowledge the risks, prepare for them as thoroughly as possible, and then move forward with both confidence and humility. As Samantha pulled into her driveway, she glanced up at the night sky one more time. Somewhere up there, other pilots were navigating through darkness, trusting their training, their aircraft, and themselves to bring them safely to their destinations. She felt a kinship with them, fellow travelers in the vast, beautiful, occasionally dangerous realm above the earth. Tomorrow she would join them again, adding another entry to her logbook, another chapter to her story. Not despite what had happened over the Bitterroots, but because of it, because she had fallen from the sky and survived, and in surviving had discovered not just what she was capable of enduring, but what she was capable of becoming. The gravel bar had been just the beginning. The real journey of recovery, rediscovery, and purpose had unfolded in the days, weeks, and months that followed. And like any good flight, the joy wasn't just in the destination, but in the journey itself, in each moment of challenge and triumph along the way. In aviation, there was a term for successfully navigating through difficult conditions to reach your destination, completing the mission. Samantha Mitchell had completed her most important mission, not on the day she crash-landed on a remote gravel bar, but in all the days that followed, the days when she chose to rise again, to reclaim the sky, and to transform her darkest moment into a light that could guide others through their own storms. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.